welcome to Lawpod. My name is Karen Wray, and I am a final year Law and Politics student here at Queen's. I'm joined today by my co-interviewer, Deirdre Timoney. Deirdre, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Deirdre Timoney and I'm the Careers and Employability Officer in the School of Law, and I'm delighted to be here today.
Deirdre and I are also joined by our two guests, Simon and Katherine. Would you each also like to introduce yourselves?
I'm Simon Murray from Murray Kelly Moores in Bangor, and I'm a general solicitor.
And I'm Katherine McAuley. I work for Joseph Magee and Company Solicitors Limited, and I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you to both of you for coming today. We'll start off with Simon. Could you please outline your career path to date and what inspired you to pursue a career in law?
My career path started some time ago, but I suppose my first memories of why I had an interest in law was things like reading To Kill a Mockingbird and just having that sort of passion towards justice and doing right for people. I was lucky enough in my family background. My father was a lawyer, solicitor in a general practice. He actually set the practice up that I work in at the moment. And his enthusiasm when he came home from work about his job and the variety of cases that he dealt with, because we were initially a criminal practice, sort of got me interested. From a very young age, from about 13 or 14, I just started to say, yeah, this is something I wanted to do, and worked very hard, found it difficult, wasn't particularly academic, and scraped through my then O levels and then A levels, and just about got the right grades to get into Queen's. And I started off at Queen's then and did the LLB here.
So then, Katherine, the same to you.
Yeah, so I suppose I didn't necessarily always set out to become a lawyer. It wasn't something that from a very young age I had decided I wanted to do. I was always really interested in public speaking. I had a bit of a debating background. I did a lot of that, speech and drama. And so I was really interested when I was looking at career options, and I wanted to go to university. I knew that, and I wanted something that utilised that aspect. And so I settled on law without being entirely convinced it was what I wanted to do. And I came to Queen's in 2013 and started my undergraduate studies here. And I suppose that throughout the course of those studies, I then really got a passion for law. I think particularly what drew me to that was that the impact that you can have on people's lives personally, and particularly why I'm now in private practice for that exact reason. But I suppose I didn't always set out necessarily to become a lawyer, but it's where I've ended up.
So Simon, would you be able to tell me a bit of information about how you actually qualify as solicitor here in Northern Ireland?
Okay, it's quite complicated, but basically the more common path would be somebody doesn't necessarily have to come to Queen's, but does an LLB, which is a law degree. There's lots of combined law degrees now, but the first thing you need to check is there are a certain number of core subjects that you would need to cover if you will then get your degree. You get your degree and then you want to go to the institute. So that would be the first thing that somebody would need to think about. Then they have to apply to the institute at Queen's and take an exam, and they have to then either decide they want to become barrister or they want to become a solicitor. And in taking that exam, they also then have to get an apprenticeship with a firm, or if they're going to go to the bar and become a barrister, then they need to have a master. Then they go to the institute. Course is probably going to be under review, I would suspect, in the next year or 2 years. But at the moment, you do a part placement first, and then you do a full year at the institute, and then you do another 6 months at the firm or with your master, and then you become a qualified solicitor or barrister. So that's the pathway at the moment.
So in terms of private practice, I mean, obviously we know that you're operating independently of government or corporate entity, but can you tell us a bit more? What really is private practice at its core?
I suppose the way I would look at it is if you take a GP normally will deal with anything that comes through the door. So it's any sort of legal problem. And for me, that's a major challenge. I mean, a lot of firms would now specialise quite a bit because it's so difficult to keep up to date with all the different areas of law. But I do like just getting a random phone call and going, I've never dealt with that problem before, and then trying to think of a way to help that person solve that issue. You're not expert in every area, and there's certain areas, certainly as I've gone through my career, where I've went, no, I don't know enough about that area, and therefore it's dangerous for me to advise in it because I'm out of date. But the real beauty of being in general practice is that wide range of different legal problems, whether it's a conveyance or a will or a probate or a matrimonial issue or a criminal issue or a car accident. There's so many different areas you can advise on in general practice. And that to me is really the exciting thing about it.
And for you, Katherine, in terms of general practice, what appealed to you about general practice just at the very outset?
I think the variety, as Simon says, of the different problems that you encounter, also the different clients that you meet. I mean, there's such a wide variety of issues that you come across on a day-to-day basis, and that always allows for a very, very interesting practice. And no 2 days are ever the same in that. So I think that's one element of it. The other element is that you really can make an impact and make a difference. And, you know, whenever you see a case, somebody coming in through the door or off the high street to you with a problem, and you can deal with that problem, you can offer them advice and you can work alongside them on that. That's a really, really fulfilling thing to experience. And I think is something that private practice has that maybe perhaps other areas of law mightn't.
And in terms of, obviously, there's always changes in the economy. And I'm sure, Simon, obviously, through the decades, you've seen some degree of change in the landscape of general practice, private practice.
That's a very good point. Primarily, I'm a property lawyer, and the change, particularly from about 2004 to 2008, was enormous because we had a massive property boom and everybody was buying properties. And then come sort of May 2007, it just dropped. And that had major impact in the practices because, for example, I did a lot of building work for builders, and builders weren't building, and they went into real difficulties with insolvencies and debt. And so that fluctuation in the economy is actually kind of a really big impact on the general practice, because not only does it affect your property side, it affects your probate side because people can't sell houses. And it affects your matrimonial side because people can't do transfers of equity, or they can't resolve their financial difficulties in a matrimonial situation if the market collapses. And Northern Ireland's still reeling from 2007. There's still a long way to go before properties actually fully adjust themselves back to where they were. And we're possibly now going through that same cycle as we speak. I can see that sort of happening now in the next year or two.
And I guess for you, Katherine, just, you know, distilling that down to the coalface, what's a typical day like for you in general practice? I guess we're keen to maybe understand what are the key tasks or responsibilities, or indeed the typical client interactions that you would have.
I suppose, and maybe Simon, you'll agree with this, there is no such thing as a typical day. Every day is different. There are no 2 days that are the same. But generally speaking, a lot of my work involves attendance at court at all levels, magistrates court, county court, right up through to the High Court. So quite often a typical day would be in court in the morning, and you might find that could be for an early review in Belfast, and then you might have a case perhaps in Lisburn or Newry. So you may be covering 2 or 3 courts in the same day. That's not unusual. Then in the afternoon time, generally we would find that I would try to factor in appointments. So be that consultations with clients, be that perhaps consultations with counsel or other practitioners to discuss cases. However, it doesn't always go according to plan. A lot of what I do is very reactive. So for example, I could have a plan of what I'm doing that day, and then I might find that an emergency matter lands on my desk that morning and I need to go and deal with that immediately. Again, a lot of the work that I would do would involve PACE call-outs. So if a client has been arrested and requires legal advice, has been detained at a police station, I will have to go and attend immediately, and those are the sort of matters that can't wait. So quite often you need to be able to be flexible, and you need to be able to work under quite a lot of pressure. You find that you have to be able to be flexible and to deal with the problems as and when they arise, and you can't always prepare. So every day, like I say, is different, but every day is very interesting.
It sounds like a very stimulating and hectic environment, Katherine. Simon, I guess just aligned with that, can you think of any particularly interesting project or rewarding project, or indeed challenging case that maybe you've worked on that, you know, just to give us a better flavour for what that's all about?
Well, in my earlier career, I sort of covered all areas, and now I'd be much more in the property side. I do quite a lot with the Law Society and at Queen's at the Institute as well. But back in the day, where just the way Katherine was describing her day, where you were trying to, you walked into the office and you maybe had 3 or 4 appointments, and then just as you rightly described, just something hits you. And it's that ability to cope with that under pressure and go, right, okay, I'm going to have to cancel all my appointments today and then deal with that problem. But then also the challenge of managing your day-to-day work, keeping it going and not letting that slip, because if you focus on one big issue that arises, the other things that you've passed over could also then become big issues. So it's that challenge in keeping all the balls up in the air. It is not easy, but it is very rewarding when you do it, and you get the results that you're hoping to get for your clients.
And likewise for you, Katherine, I suppose working obviously in the court environment so much, that in itself has a degree of rigour and expectation alongside it. Is there any particular case or project that you worked on that you found very stimulating?
I think any cases that have involved securing protection or justice for individuals, so as an example, victims and survivors of domestic abuse, those are cases where somebody comes into you and they're quite often in a very vulnerable position. They're quite often scared and they really are seeking the protection of the law, and they're relying on you to do that for them. In a lot of those cases, people, for various reasons, may not feel that they can approach police. Sometimes if they do, the police may say that there isn't perhaps enough evidence. And so they sometimes then will seek a civil remedy. So most often that is by way of what's known as a non-molestation order or a protection order under the Family Homes and Domestic Violence Act. So that is something that I find can be very rewarding, seeing a client come in and being able to secure that protection for them quite often on the same day, and then them leaving the office just with a completely different view. And you can see that real tangible effect of what you have done. And I think that's very, very rewarding as a practitioner.
Yes, I can imagine a lot of job satisfaction in that.
So I know you've both touched on already some of the things that you enjoy about working in private practice. But Katherine, could you tell me a little bit more about the benefits of private practice that you find?
Okay, so I think for me, and I've been working in private practice just for a few years, I think I have seen that there is a real benefit to being able to manage your own caseload. You, in private practice, have quite a lot of responsibility for your cases. And quite often you're the person that the client sees from start to finish throughout the whole case. And I think that is quite good because you get a real sense of ownership of the work that you do. And that can be a real advantage. I think the other thing is, and I alluded to it before, the fact that you really can see that there is a difference being made and the impact that you make. I mean, whenever you are dealing with people, and they're quite often people that maybe are vulnerable, they may be from a difficult background, a disadvantaged background, those are people that really need somebody to be there to assist them. And I think to be able to be that person is something that's very fulfilling. So certainly for me, those are the positives of private practice. I think in addition to that, the fact that you can use your skills. So a lot of what I do, I can trace back right to what I was learning as an undergraduate law student at Queen's, and a lot of that is very, very applicable in my day-to-day practice.
On the other end of that then, Simon, could you tell me a little bit about some of the challenges you think are facing private practice at the minute?
Just following on from what Katherine was saying there, to me, one of the big advantages now in going into private practice is not only you take on more responsibility from the outset, but you learn a lot quicker because you've been thrown in the deep end a bit more than maybe if you're in a big multinational practice. But what has happened really is because the quality of graduates coming out of here in Queen's, internationally, that's now recognised. So a lot of those undergraduates are moving into large firms, international firms, large Belfast firms. A lot of those large Belfast firms have now been taken over by English firms, and therefore the small private practices are struggling, and they're struggling to get good quality undergraduates. And lots of the undergraduates that go through the institute are going into the bigger firms. So I think that's opened a door for people at undergrads level now to look seriously at just going into private practice. For the variety of work, your ability to make an impact is much greater in a smaller firm. And also the ability to progress your career, I think, is a lot better in a smaller firm. If you are a small fish in a big pond, you mightn't go anywhere, and you may then find actually your area of expertise becomes very small, and that restricts you in only one area, which means that you then really are stuck to that area. Whereas if you start off in general practice, you get experience right across the spectrum, which is very helpful because a lot of the different areas of law are interconnected. And if you're just going into one area in one big firm, you lose that. And that's another reason why I think the smaller client, private client type practices is very worthwhile looking at.
So we all know that there's always a lot of new developments in the legal field. So Katherine, how do you stay updated on changes?
I think as solicitors, we are required with the Law Society of Northern Ireland, who are our governing body, to keep up to date with developments. And we do that by way of continuing professional development. So throughout the year, we undertake a number of training courses and a set number of hours. So that can be really helpful in terms of keeping up to date. One of the other things, I'm involved with the Northern Ireland Young Solicitors Association, which represents solicitors to 10 years qualified. And as part of that, we run our own information seminars, webinars and CPD courses, particularly looking at the sort of more recently qualified solicitors and tailoring maybe some updates in relation to them. So I think that's one way of doing it. I think using and utilising your contacts, particularly the experience of other practitioners in other areas of law, is really important too. As solicitors, we work quite closely with our colleagues at the bar, and quite often they are very informed in terms of particularly case law or any developments. It is something you always have to be upskilling. You always need to make sure that you are kept abreast of all the recent developments, and that is, one, it's a professional obligation, but two, it means that you are then best able to advise your client.
So in terms of changes or developments in the legal field, I guess one of them is Gen AI. And we recently had a contributor in from a large legal company talking about how AI was impacting their. So Simon, do you think that the use of AI tools will potentially transform your profession? And if that is the case, how soon do you think they'll actually be used in day-to-day practice?
The Law Society had their 100th anniversary last year, and they had a conference, and one of the speakers, a couple of speakers actually came along, and I remember looking at the headline, AI, how is it going to impact on the legal profession? And most of us sort of thought, it's not going to be in my lifetime, it's going to be years ahead. But since I listened to that and then listened to the podcast, which was absolutely brilliant, I realised that's completely wrong. And this is just a steam train, I think, that's really coming very fast in every walk of life. Because, I mean, even if you now pick up the phone and you ring your bank, that's an AI conversation. If you think about it, they ask you these questions and they're generated and then they move to something else. And so much of our life already is being affected by AI. So if you think of law being a procedural practice, then there's massive potential for AI to come in. But the unique thing about being a solicitor, a bit like being a GP again, is that ability to have to deal with the personality and the actual angst of that person. You're consoling them, whether it's a house transaction that's gone wrong, or it's a matrimonial matter, or a more serious criminal matter. I don't know how that's going to completely eradicate the solicitor, but I think I'm now much, much more concerned about how we control it. But I think it's going to have more of an impact on bigger firms, those firms that invest in it and can afford to invest in it, than the smaller firms. And I personally feel there's still a need for smaller firms around the province. So the impact's going to be great. For my practice, it will definitely affect us, but I still think will be needed.
Okay. So it's really a case of watch this space and see what develops.
But it's coming quickly. Okay.
So I guess a final synopsis. Obviously, we have a lot of law students here currently studying furiously and keen to graduate. And I guess in reflecting back, firstly, I'll ask you, Katherine, what advice would you have for current law students who are obviously just maybe coming towards the end of their studies, or indeed solicitors who actually are in their very early years of their legal practice? Based on your own experience, what advice would you offer?
I think that's a really good question. When I look back at, and actually it was quite interesting coming in today and reflecting on my time since I've been a student at Queen's, but I think whenever I think back, it really is that idea of wanting to, for me, make a difference. And I think that whenever you are considering what it is that you want to do, you need to have a passion. And I think I can, when I look back, say I always had a passion to do what I'm doing. And I think that if you are considering your options as a law student, what are you passionate about? What do you really enjoy? And follow that initially. So if that's technology, whatever it is, look into that. I think as well, get as much experience as you possibly can. That was something that I did. I went out and I got practical experience, and then I was able to apply that. And, I think that's really important. Learn from people around you. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. You can learn so much from other people. And I think have confidence in yourself. I think quite often as a student, you're always learning, and sometimes you can focus on the things that maybe you don't know, but actually have confidence in your ability and in what you can do and what you do know. And I think if you do that, that's a good starting point.
That's brilliant advice. And likewise, Simon, would you have any guidance for our students of today?
I don't know how I can top that, because that was really just spot on. My advice would be to get as much information as you can about what is it like to be a solicitor in what type of firm. If you want to go down that path, or a barrister, you can go down to the courts, you can sit in courts, you can maybe, the bar are particularly keen to take students for a day or two round with them. So it's to get that hands-on experience to find out what part of the law you want to investigate, or what part of the law you want to be in. But I agree totally with Katherine there about the passion. I actually started off, I thought I was going to be a family lawyer, and I specialised in law and children and family. And then actually when I got into practice, the way the firm sort of changed, I did less and less of that, but I didn't actually enjoy that. So my passion was for one area in the academic side, but when I actually got into the actual practice of it, I found it difficult, and then went down a different route. So it's exploring all the different areas. I think IT actually would be one. When we're talking about AI, there was a student that came into our office, and he was very, very, very good on IT. And he eventually did a master's in law and IT, and he went to America and did his degree there, and he's doing very well. But law as a degree covers so many bases. The door's open to so many different avenues for you, because it gives you that good grounding in so many areas.
I think that's really good, valuable advice, and definitely food for thought.
So that brings our episode today to an end. Just want to say a massive thank you to Simon and Katherine for taking the time out of their very busy schedules to come and speak to Deirdre and I today. And thank you to Deirdre as well for co-interviewing with me. Simon and Katherine, you've both provided such fascinating insights into the world of private practice, and I'm sure that there are many students listening now who have gained so much valuable information from the both of you, so massive thank you.